The Girl on Bikini, Part 6. A story by E.B.'s Heart. Why is Officer Ben not picking his calls? What do I do? Bob's wife asked nervously. Oh, our wife, I heard someone was moving your furniture, and I decided to come check who it was, Dan said, smiling sheepishly. Hello. Hello. Hello, madam. Officer Ben's voice on her phone was heard by both of them. You can speak to the caller, Dan encouraged her and picked the camera up. Don't worry, I will speak to the caller later, Bob's wife said, sounding as calm as possible. Is this camera working? Dan, who was noticing how strange Bob's wife was acting, asked her while putting on the camera. Give me the camera, Dan. There are some very personal videos in it, she said and snatched the camera from him. Oh, sorry, Dan said, eyeing her suspiciously. Could it be she knows? Did this camera capture anything? A lot of questions were going through Dan's mind, but he decided to act nice and find out what she knows. I have not even asked how you are feeling, since the police concluded Bob's death as suicide, Dan said while pretending to shed tears. Do you think he actually committed suicide? Her question threw Dan off balance. He started gasping for air and sweating. Because, what if he didn't kill himself? She said and tried to walk out of the door. Dan tried to hit her, but remembered she came with people that were moving her property, and restrained himself. What do I do? I think this woman knows that I killed her husband. I think she found something implicating. I need to take that camera and know what is on it. Dan said with fear. Madam, we are done, one of the property movers said to Bob's wife. Dan, we are done. You can lock the door and give the estate security the keys, Bob's wife said and turned to leave. Let me follow you people and at least help out a little, Dan said, running after her. She turned and looked at him with so much disgust. No, Dan, that is not necessary. This is a moving company, so they don't allow external help, she said and slammed her car door to follow the moving van. Dan joined her in the front seat of her car. Before she could blink, let me just give my moral support. She became scared immediately and started trying to converse freely with Dan to avoid him suspecting her. What about your car? Did you just leave it there? She asked, feigning surprised. Yes, I think it's safe there, Dan answered nervously. When they got to her new apartment, Dan insisted on helping the movers. He kept watching Bob's wife to know if she will call the police officer. Bob's wife, who was scared of Dan harming her, sent a text message to her cousin. When it was dark, Dan announced that he was leaving. Bob's wife bid him good night and called her friend immediately. Please come over to my new apartment. I don't feel safe. I will gist you later. She was still speaking on the phone when Dan, who had covered his face, hit her behind her head. She lost consciousness and fell on the ground. Hello. Hello. Raymond, Bob's wife's friend, was almost shouting on the phone. Dan quickly cut the call and rushed to her handbag. He opened it, brought out the camera and took the memory card in it. He then held her throat and squeezed it until she died. She took her children to her cousin's sister's house, so the house was empty. Dan ran out quickly. He went to the club and stayed there until the next day. When Raymond, Bob's wife's friend, got to her apartment, she was cold. He called the police, who came and arrested him. His explanations that she was the one who called him fell on deaf ears. Yes, we have seen that she called you from her call log, but when you got there, you started misbehaving. The police officers put the whole blame on Raymond. How can you be friends with a married woman? And how convenient for you to just find her dead? These were the questions the police asked Raymond repeatedly. This is a simple open and close case, since we have the culprit, Officer Ben said to the other policemen, and they all nodded. We were course mates in school. I knew her even before she married Bob. Is it an offense to now be friends with a married woman? Raymond's question infuriated Officer Ben, and he slapped him across the face. You asked her out and she refused, then you strangled her to death, and you are here claiming she gave you a distress call. Are you the police? Why would you be the one she would call? Maybe she called to say hello, and you carried yourself to her house and killed her when she didn't comply, he said and slapped him even harder. Dan picked his car from the estate the next day and went home. He put the memory card from the camera in his laptop and his heart jumped. How did this woman get this recording? Thank God I got there in time. 2 weeks later, Bob's wife was buried, her friend Raymond remained in custody, while Dan's life was back to normal. He was happy someone was arrested for Bob's wife's death. Then 1 month later, Bob's wife's cousin put Bob's wife's phone on and saw a message in her draft that did not deliver. The message read, "Cece, please, Dan is here and I think he might harm me. Call Officer Ben for me now." There is a footage of Dan concerning Bob. She read the message and gasped, then called Officer Ben. "Please, can you come over? This might help in finding who killed my sister." Officer Ben drove to her house when he saw the message and the date it was drafted. He was speechless. How can it be Dan? He headed straight to Dan's house the next minute. "Honey, the police are here," Dan's wife said nonchalantly. Dan almost had a heart attack upon hearing the police.